Hello, podcast world, and welcome to the Beers with Engineers podcast, where we have a pint of fun and a shot of geek. My name is Doug Tiger, and this is episode number 27. More importantly, this is the first anniversary podcast. In a special episode, your intrepid host, Bert Uschold, has agreed to have the tables turned. Here we hope to learn more about Bert and reflect on the past year. Bert, who should know better, asked me in a recent interview if I had any questions. So I took the opportunity and requested to interview him. And so, here we are. The title, focusing more on descriptiveness than creativity, is On the Other Side of the Mic. In this episode, I will ask Bert the questions he typically asks others. Through the past year, some of these topics have been covered, but this episode brings it all together in one convenient and discreet place. As a reminder, please go to Bert's website, dexterityeng.com, to learn about the services and products he provides. Also, you can join the ongoing debate as to whether it is appropriate for Bert to describe himself as a full-stack product development engineer. And if you don't know what we mean by this, I invite you to listen to episode number 20, where Danielle Y.S. first introduced Bert to this kind of role. With that, please sit back, pour yourself a cold one, and enjoy this special edition of Beers with Engineers, featuring the one and only Bert Uschold. When I first met Bert in the summer of 1986, he woke me up while I was sleeping on his guest bed. For more details, please go back to the episode where he introduces me. Since then, we've been roommates, stood up in each other's weddings, been devoted godfathers to each other's children. We've shared multiple Super Bowl tragedies with an occasional win. We fried a lot of chicken wings along the way.
Oh, that's for sure.
Bert has an outstanding character, is centered in his life, has a wonderful wife, and 3 fantastic sons. Ladies and gentlemen, when I grow up, I want to be like Bert. Let's see why.
There you go. Good luck.
Bert, I have a question for you, and you know it's coming.
All right.
What beer are you drinking, or would you want to be drinking right now?
I'm just drinking water since it's 10 o'clock in the morning, but my drink of choice is usually Jim Beam and Pepsi. That is my most typical. And as I've confessed numerous times, I do not like beer, do not drink beer, but I have had, I think, 3.5 beers in my entire life. And not only have more than half of those beers been with you, particularly, you paid for both of them because it was on my 21st birthday.
I'm proud to say I remember that.
But I think was it my first legal drink in the U.S., because I could drink at 19 in Canada. It was a shot of Jack Daniels at, was it Deja Vu or Decisions 3? Do you remember? It was some little bar right around the corner from the apartment complex that we lived in.
Yeah, it was at the tiny bar where the bartender took up half of the space.
No. That was the Oasis.
The Oasis.
Yeah, where
if you didn't know,
where a different roommate of mine took his eventually to be wife on their first date to this little tiny bar, and I said, "Oh, that takes some guts. Good on you."
That bar is now gone.
Yes, sadly. All right, so yeah, not a beer drinker, but half of the beers I've drunk have been with you. So there you go.
Say no more. Bert, do you have a favorite engineering joke, either one that was given in the podcast or one of your own?
Well, I have like 3 go-tos. One has been given a number of times. One I think I gave when someone else didn't have one. The third I'm going to just save in case I need it. But I will reflect. I think my favorite joke that we've had from the year was Dave Girton's his little software joke was 99 bugs in the code, 99 bugs in the code. Take one down, pass it around. 127 bugs in the code. And that just really tickled me. It's just so dumb, but it's so true. I guess that's why it's funny.
I forgot that one, and I do remember when hearing it, I already knew the punchline.
Oh, did you? I had never heard it
Well,
before. I
I
had
hadn't
never heard
heard
it
it
before.
either, but I just
Yeah.
anticipated the
Oh,
punchline
okay.
was
Yeah, I maybe that's what made it so good because I couldn't predict it, or I did not predict it. I had no idea where it was going.
they never go down, they only go up to the
That's right.
software engineers.
Yeah, right.
Bert, we're going to move into a little more background about yourself.
All right.
And you have, of course, mentioned many things, but can you put it all together, tie it up in a bow for those of us who are curious? Who is Bert Uschold, the man, the engineer?
I was expecting the man, the myth, the legend, but the man, the engineer,
You are
does
not a myth,
have to
and we will not say in whose mind you are a legend.
All right. So, as far as engineering goes, when I was in eighth grade, I had a notion that I wanted to be an architect. I remember years prior, I wanted to be a lumberjack because they ate pancakes, but that was like 6 or 7 year old logic. So, architecture seemed interesting to me. Took mechanical drawing classes. By the third year, we actually did sort of architectural drawing classes, and for whatever reason, I wasn't interested in it anymore at that time. I don't remember how engineering came to be something interesting to me. My brother is an electrical engineer, so that probably had something to do with it. But I wasn't sure which type of engineering I wanted to go into, and somehow through some fate, I was invited to go on a field trip to a engineering company in Buffalo. I lived just outside of Buffalo, and like I said, how I got invited to that, I have no idea, but I'm very glad I did. And they just did a whole bunch of cool stuff there. They did car crash testing. They had also what was it? Wind tunnel testing, big things and small things, and then they also were doing some like artificial tissue. And as I'm sitting here, this almost sounds like unreal that this company doesn't really exist. It's like something you'd go to in a movie and like we do this and do that and all that. But Calspan Engineering, I think was their name. I'll have to look them up sometime and see if they're still around. So asking them, well, what kind of engineer does this stuff? They said, well, mechanical engineer. I said, all right, good, that works for me. And kind of in retrospect, looking at my childhood, I don't see a whole ton of things pointing towards engineering. Some people look and say, oh yeah, I was doing this, that, and all that other stuff, and not so much. I do remember I did make a nightlight. I had a little clock radio, not a clock radio, just a clock that did not have a light or reflective anything on it, and so I made a little a light for it where I took a hanger, taped it to a piece of cardboard, taped a battery to it, wrapped the hanger around, put a flashlight bulb in a little loop on the hanger, and then I had a piece of cardboard taped to the hanger where I pushed that piece of cardboard. It would take the bulb down onto the battery. The light would go on, and I had the nightlight. That was my first invention, a nightlight.
So this wouldn't be the first time in your podcast series duct tape was brought up, but I can tell you
I think
that.
I'm sorry. I think it was probably just masking tape. I think I was too young for duct tape at the time.
But it reminds me that how often I have, being a Pennsylvania hillbilly, used duct tape and hanger wire to fix and create almost anything. So in that
Yep.
we were very similar, were we
Yep. There
not?
you go.
I
Yep.
have a question for you before you move on, and it's about becoming an engineer. I have two observations about your family through the years. The one is most certainly your dad brought an awareness of math to your
Oh yeah.
to your
Yep.
life, and we can talk about that. But I want to bring in the second observation. Was I remember being with many, if not all, of your brothers one time, and there are many. And one of them, and I wish I remembered who, and maybe you know who, spoke with great confidence about how much money was in a gallon of loose change, which is part of engineering estimation. And I don't know if that is something you were familiar with, but one of your brothers
Well,
literally said something like, "Oh, there's $127.50 in a gallon of change," whatever it
I
was.
am. Well, get there. So Dad taught math at Canisius College for I think 40 years, something like that. And there are four brothers and four sisters. There's nine of us. And I believe you are mistaking. It wasn't my brother that said that. It was me that said that.
Nope.
Oh, okay. We're gonna come to blows on this one because back in the day before debit cards and I used credit cards for everything, we used to get change and just throw it in a jar. And now it's like $100 per quart
Okay.
is roughly what it is. And I remember Ray had like a 5 gallon jar of it. And 5 gallons, that's 20 quarts. So it was around $2,000. And he goes, yeah, that's pretty close to $2,000 once he counted it. And that tidbit of knowledge almost earned me a couple $100 because one of my other roommates, John Hibner, he collected change and this, that, and the other thing. And sometime after he moved out, we also worked together. And I stopped by his cube one time and he said, Bert, I'm finally getting around to count all my change. And I said, well, how much is there? And he said, 5 quarts, or about 5 quarts. And he goes, yeah, but 1 quart doesn't have many quarters on it because, I had to do laundry in it. And so I threw out a number, 5 quarts. I said, all right, $125.42. I don't know what number it was, but for 5 quarts, that's a good number to throw out. And I think I said, if I'm within $5, I get half of it. And he agreed. He agreed to that deal. And so a few weeks later, I see him again. As he finished counting, I said, oh, it's like $132, Bert. You're off by a little bit. And I go, yeah, but that was 4 weeks ago. You've put 4 weeks of change in there. That raised it up.
That's right. I don't trust John Hibner.
I will maintain that at the time I made that estimate, I was within the acceptable tolerance limits and should have gotten half of his change, but I didn't. But
Next time I see him, I'll bring it up. And I guess I'll concede this. I believe that it was not you who I overheard saying that, and it may well have been Ray mocking you.
That's also possible. Ray has been known to disparage engineers once in a while.
That's my point. So I'm thinking that that's how I observed it, was somebody
Yeah,
was actually mocking you about it.
that's
I won't take it
possible.
away from you, but I'll add it to your myth
Yeah.
or your
A
legend.
brother would never mock his own brother.
Anyway,
That's right.
we took that tangent while you were going through your background, but I do think that having spent some time with your father and how his math mind worked,
All right.
that certainly, while we've already covered that mathematicians aren't engineers, you and I have done that in the last episode, that clearly engineering is all about math, and so that did build up your mathematical skills, let's say, just having
Yep.
that mind in
Yep.
your house.
Yep. It. So two guests over the years who I worked with quite a bit, they describe themselves as design engineers and not mechanical engineers. And I think actually, coincidentally, my first title out of college was as design engineer. I'm not sure I really was a design engineer. I'm not sure if that was a good title. But there's part of me that feels mechanical engineer is better or more prestigious than design engineer. But I think both those guys said, yeah, well, mechanical engineers are more super analytical, super techy following stuff, and design engineers are a little bit less so and just kind of more, maybe less math and more problem solving. And I think I've come to the opinion and acceptance, if that's the right word, that yeah, that probably does fit a little bit better. And as I think I've been saying lately, I call myself a full stack product development engineer, which kind of the jack of all trades sort of title.
That's what I was going to say is, why can't you be both? and I think you are both. In fact, you've even touched on tooling engineering, which is a little different. I know not much, but a
But
little bit.
yeah,
And so I think that we can talk about the nuances, but I think you're both.
yeah. Well, I will a recent accomplishment, which I'll take a moment to toot my horn. There was a problem I identified like literally 20 some years ago with what was it? Process capability. This company had was molding parts, and they gave a process capability report to make sure that we can do these parts consistently. And without going into all the boring details, I didn't like the way they did it because I thought they did it wrong. But it turned out I couldn't come up with a better way. And 20-ish years later, of thinking about that problem on and off again, I came up with a solution. And it was one of those things like it felt like I was reinventing the wheel. Like someone else had to have done this before. And looked around, never found it. Even got to the point of doing research through technical papers, quality journals, and this, that, and the other thing. And I found a handful of people who had worked on it. And we'll just what it is determining the process capability for a true position dimension. So instead of just being a number plus or minus this, there's kind of like an area involved. Imagine shooting arrows at a target, and instead of just measuring the size of something, is a pretty good analogy. And found papers written by guys who literally had written books on the general subject that candidly I thought were awful. They made some ridiculous assumptions, and I said, this just doesn't make sense. And then found a paper that was really close to what I had, and was a little disappointed that I wasn't first. And then, after looking at it for a while, said, wait a minute, he's got this big major error in it. And I was just super psyched because that was the point where I said, yeah, I came up with something new. And the irony was all my kids were at school. My wife was in Florida with their sisters, and I had no one to celebrate with. So, but anywho, so yeah, so there's some math in it, but even then I solved that problem with a very analytical, logical approach and less of a mathematical approach. But anyways, I
Well,
know enough math to be dangerous.
I've actually encountered that. My company produces metal stampings, and we have a number of call outs that are sometimes, in the case of a circular, like a washer or a spacer, a
Yeah.
concentricity spec, and
Okay.
sometimes it's true positioning. And we've had raging debates as to whether internally, and sometimes with our customers, as to whether the part
It's
meets
capable.
the drawing. And we've used your calculations to help us.
All right.
So
Sweet. Awesome.
so no
And
royalties for you, Bert. Sorry.
so, but if you want, look me up on LinkedIn, and there's a connection to that paper that I wrote and published on LinkedIn. And my goal is to get that published in a real journal someday. So,
Nice. Let's stay on engineering and accomplishments. I think actually all it takes is one accomplishment like that, and that's one unique thing is often more than most people achieve in their
sure.
career. But frankly, you've done so much more. And could you give me one other or two other examples of some really challenging jobs you've taken on that you've really gained some satisfaction over?
Um, as far the challenging part, maybe not as challenging as you're thinking, but the first one that comes to mind was years ago when I was working at Ethicon Endosurgery. We had a team of engineers, of which I was on, focused to thoracoscopic surgery. And I think it took us a week just to be able to pronounce that word properly. And Roger and me, not the movie Roger and Me, Roger was the other. Anyways, Roger and me sitting together identified, so wait a minute, these doctors need this little tool for their surgeries. And so we prototyped it, made a few different variations, took it to doctors, and they said, yeah, we don't need that. What's the point? We will just do this instead. And we were a little disappointed that the doctors didn't like what we had and said, all right, well, they're the doctors. They know better, right? Until 6, 9 months later, I was in a different department at the time working on other stuff, and someone comes up to me and say, "Hey, Bert, do you still have those little prototypes you made earlier in the year?" I said, "Yeah. Yeah, because the doctors say they want them now." Well, that's what we told them 6 months ago. So we were take great satisfaction of knowing what the doctors needed 6 months before they knew what they needed. So that's point number one. The second one was working on a insulin. I think they call it an insulin patch pump, and there was a challenge of you gave a continuous dose of insulin, but you could also push a button to get a couple extra units, and that's pretty typical of how diabetics take care of themselves. And there was, the tolerance stack up on that particular function was way too big to meet the regulatory requirements. So there was a brainstorming session. I don't know, 6, 8 engineers called, and for whatever reason, I wasn't able to make it, but had one or two ideas in my head beforehand. And so after it was done, talked to somebody, say anything come out of it, and they said, well, not really. And I asked, well, did anybody talk about solving the problem not with part design but with assembly steps and how you assemble it, and just ignore the part variation and take care of it in assembly? I said, well, no, we didn't really do that. And so I forget. Anyways, through whatever next steps, it was decided that was the method most likely to be successful. And it was a little bit of pride, bravado, I guess, that I thought of that kind of right away, where these other guys sitting around for half hour never thought of it. What surprised me about it was actually solving it, designing the parts and figuring out the steps to assemble it, just because of all the various features. Turned out to be a lot harder and more challenging than I expected it to be, but was able to get the parts made. It was cool. That was great. Very satisfying.
So we've talked about this when in medical devices, the irony is that the consumer really doesn't want to use your product ever. That's
Pretty much,
that,
yeah.
yeah. Of course, it makes them feel better. So once they
Yep.
need it, they're glad they have it. And many of the devices are, let's say, obscure, or methods that most people, the general public, wouldn't know about. I think it's amazing, that entire industry, how it's made surgeries and treatments more efficient and improved so
Yep.
much. Do you have any products that you've worked on that you're at liberty to tell us about, that we'd recognize?
That
Because
you
the device you
recognize.
just mentioned, we can't even say it or spell it. So,
Well, there was not a medical device, but I did work on a couple of cell phones for Nokia years ago. Excuse me. And they were mostly sold outside the US, but I did meet a woman once who pulled out her phone, and it was one of the ones I had worked on. And that was kind of exciting. A current one, which you can go and buy still from Amazon, at my last job at Avery Dennison, it's called the Buttoneer. Buttoneer was something Avery Dennison had been making for years. They wanted a new version because the old one, candidly, was awful. And pretty much started from clean sheet of paper and made a new buttoneer. What a buttoneer does is it makes it real easy to put a button back on your shirt or pants once it's fallen off. And I have found a handful of other uses for it. I think I got a pair of pants that I wore to church the other day that I've got hemmed with a couple of those
hmm.
little clips to hold it in place. So yeah, go to Amazon, Buttoneer, Buttoneer,
I
and
have a theory, Bert, that the most impressive but unheralded innovations occur inside the box. Have you heard of inside the box thinking and challenges as opposed to outside? There's nothing wrong with outside the box thinking. You can be disruptive to an entire industry, or even a culture. But I think the toiling away at products such as the buttoneer,
yep,
and saying, okay, the buttoneer is a low margin, tool that is actually very helpful, but you have to do it inside a certain limitation. Whether you can't have new tooling, you can't raise the cost, the design funds are limited, and to me, engineering solutions that are inside the box can be the most cumulatively profound and difficult. Do you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
I'm not fully sure I understand the question. I guess so. Inside the box might be iterative evolutionary changes, and outside the box is revolutionary changes.
Well, yes. I mean, there's actually a whole Harvard Business Review on inside the box thinking. I I'd already been thinking about it myself and discovered that they'd done a whole piece on it. But it's literally, okay, we have a problem and we need engineers to solve the problem. We don't need engineers to come in and say, well, let's think outside the box because A,
Oh,
there are
okay.
there are so many constraints
Yep.
that in any given problem, you can't go outside the box. Where, okay, you can be very creative, but we have to find ways to do better inside the box. And an example would be true positioning, like measurements and how to do that. Maybe that's not the best example, but it is taking conventional thinking inside how things are measured and put together and improving it.
So is the inside the box thinking talk about dealing with all the existing constraints? Is that
Yes,
the that's
yes,
the box? Okay.
yes. In other words, you have a limited option
Yep.
you have a limited set of movements you can make and yet solve my problem.
So which is harder, inside the box or outside the box? I think I might agree that inside the box problem solving is more difficult because me and many other engineers, generally speaking, outside the box thinking is good and preferred, but sometimes, well, yeah, good idea, can't do it. You've got to use these are the constraints. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Oh, geez, yeah, this was awful. Was I was an insulin pen of some sort, and the tolerances for delivering insulin are very tight, but the tolerances for making the glass, it's not a syringe, the vial, I'm not sure that's the right word, but we'll call it the vial. The glass tolerances are horrible. And it's like, for this entire length of the thing, we've got like, plus or minus 2 millimeters for kind of this overall length part of it. And that glass syringe is taking up like 1.5 of it. So one part is taking up 75% of the tolerance, and I've got 6 other plastic parts, which gets the rest of it. And yeah, that can be pretty challenging. That definitely, yeah. I think I'll agree with that. I've never thought of it that way, but I like that analogy, and it's an interesting thing to ponder.
To me, as a business leader, which is really the back half of my career is where I've been, I place more value on engineers that can take my set of constraints and find an actionable solution as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
one that says, oh, let's just tear it all up and start over. Well, yeah, but I have
Right.
time and budget and frankly, consumer constraints on that. I'm not ready to disrupt the whole industry. I just need to fix this problem.
Yeah. Well, I think the definition we talked about in our last episode, the end of it very much speaks to that. While considering the limitations imposed by practicality, regulation, safety, and cost. And you got to use what we've already got. There's the practicality and cost issue. I think one of the most famous engineering challenges ever solved, real problem solved on in a movie, was Apollo 13, when they had, we've got to get this square box to fit into a round hole, or vice versa. And so somebody brings in a box of stuff and throws it on a table. All right, here are your options. These are the different things that you need to do it. And assuming, I think most of that movie is pretty true. One of the things they used was the plastic cover for their user manual, or their flight manual. They had a plastic cover on it. Someone put out, yeah, take that off, tape that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was working inside a small box, hundreds of thousands of miles from the Earth.
yeah.
So yeah,
Life and limb at risk.
exactly.
Let's finish up a couple of things on engineering before we turn to some other matters. I'm going to ask you this because I always find it revealing. I have an answer for you, by the way, but I'm going to first ask you, what is your superpower?
My superpower. What I think I'm better than most people at, and it's not particularly an engineering related thing, is seeing when there's a disconnect. Two people are talking, they think they're talking about the same thing, but they're not talking about the same thing. Where I see it most often is, watching TV news shows where someone is interviewing somebody else and they're yelling back and forth at each other, but they're talking about different things. They're similar things, but they're not talking about the same things. And one kind of specific example, as much detail as I can remember, goes back years ago, and was at Ethicon, and I had been laid off, with a delayed layoff. So candidly, I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and was in some meeting with 10 other people, and they were trying to solve this problem. They just kept talking in circles and circles and circles, and I was just sort of sitting there waiting for them to solve the problem. And I said, "No, guys, you're not wanting to solve this. This is actually what you want to do." And they go, "Oh!" And 5 minutes later, we walked out. Because they weren't solving the right problem. And it's kind of, if you remember, I don't know if you were, my early days at P&G, we did I went through a Stephen Covey 7 Habits,
Mm-hmm.
in the act of listening and making sure you understand people. And some of that often just comes naturally to me. It's like, "Are you saying this?" And they'll say, "Yeah." And, oftentimes I'll say, "Forgive me for putting words in your mouth, but I think you're trying to say this." And yeah, I think, am I perfect at it? No. Am I the best in the world at it? No. But I think I'm better than most people. And ironically, I think it's a little better when I'm listening to somebody. I'll say, you'll say something to me and I'll think, well, there's two ways you could interpret that. Are you interpreting it this way or that way? And I think less so when I'm speaking will I recognize that what I am saying can be interpreted in two ways.
I
You
got
obviously
that.
learn very quickly when they answer the question wrong. No, 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 that's not what I meant. Reasonable thing to think, but that wasn't. You got to look at it from this way instead of that way.
So, Bert, that is indeed one of your superpowers, and I've thought about this. And for the listeners, have pity on me because I've had decades of Bert calling me out when I'm expressing myself, and then Bert uses his superpower to put me gently but firmly right
Yeah,
back in my place. So I've been the recipient of that, and I think the superpower actually derives, and I mean this, and the definition of humility is seeing yourself as you are. It's not
right,
false humility, but like acting
right.
like you're not, you're something less than you are. And you have the humility to know who you are, and the desire to seek the truth. And as I said, I don't always possess those traits, and you have multiple times helped me through situations where I needed that. And frankly, so your superpower is your humility in the right way. You know your vocation and what you're attempting to do, and you don't stray. So multiple
Yeah,
times in your career, you have been asked to do things that aren't what in your wheelhouse or what you really feel called and devoted to do, and that has come out in strength multiple times. So I agree that is your superpower,
yeah,
is the ability to see through things and to stay grounded.
yep.
So
Thank you.
but again, for those listening, you can only imagine what it's been like for decades to have Bert chirping at me.
Well, all right. I'm gonna unflip the tables here, and you probably won't remember this, but years ago you asked. As I remember, this question just really came out of nowhere, and the question you asked me was, it was about, people say that I can just look at a piece of cake and gain 5 pounds. And you asked me to comment on that. And I don't know why you did, but maybe it wasn't look at a piece of cake, but eat a piece of cake and gain 5 pounds. And I think you said, well, how is that possible? That's just, the cake weighs half a pound. How can you gain 5 pounds? And do you remember that or no?
Yes,
Probably not. You
yes, I
do,
do. I
actually.
do.
So maybe you
Yes.
can tell me why you asked the question. And the answer I gave was, from a pure mass balance, no, it cannot. But theoretically, there could be something in that cake that changes your metabolism such that afterwards you'll gain more weight than you would have had you not eaten that piece of cake. So I'm surprised you remember that. Why did you ask?
There was a woman at work who made that statement,
Okay.
and I told her, erroneously, by the way, but she took my advice that you can't gain more than you consume. And she said, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." I said, "You just can't." But in fact, you can, because of the metabolism changes, and in fact,
Right.
the
Right.
substance that's inside your body can react and be with other substances and absorb and so forth and so on, and then it's stored in a certain way. But I was kind of didn't understand what I was saying at the time, so I
Right.
turned to you for some thoughts on that. And that's where we
Right.
ultimately broke it down and said, actually, no, you can gain weight by more than what you put in, because you're breathing
Yeah.
oxygen, and that's mass
Yeah.
that's coming in
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway.
So, all
So
right. Very
so
good.
so ladies and
Got that.
gentlemen,
Got
again,
that
this is how
resolved.
Bert slaps me down on a regular basis.
you know, there was a. There's another guy I worked with, Jason, who I would regularly slap down, and then I remember sending out an email to everybody. It was something about DVDs where, what do you call it? The pan and scan was done. I forget something about DVDs being wrong. And then, like the day later, I found out that that information I had found on the internet was in fact wrong, and that it actually was okay. And when I sent out the publication, or maybe somebody else actually found it, Jason was so happy. I found one that Bert was wrong on. Like I'm not perfect, but
Yeah,
uh,
occasionally, it's still a Hall of Fame batting average.
yeah.
Let's shift gears and turn to the podcast for a little bit. What was your inspiration to start this podcast? What drove you here and to put all this together?
I think the idea of having a podcast had been bubbling for some time. I had never thought of what I would talk about, but it seemed like interesting. It seemed to be fun. But then a year or so ago, I was driving home from, I'd gone to a men's conference in Connecticut. And at the time, work was slow. So I was trying to do a little marketing. And somewhere along the way, the idea of a podcast and what would the title be? And said, well, I know engineering. And, as it says on the the host website, many times I've said over the years, talking to engineers, before, during, after meetings, that'd be interesting to talk about over a couple of beers sometime, but we've got to stay inside the box. It's kind of an inside the box, outside the box. So kind of the idea was to let's have that outside the box opportunity. Those things that we don't have time to talk about at work, we'll talk about them now.
I like
Um,
that.
and candidly, I guess we do some of that, maybe less than I originally thought, but I'm happy with how the format has evolved.
Well, what's your favorite thing about it?
It's talking to the people that I've known for maybe just a year, maybe 20 years, getting to know them better, learning things I've never had, learning things I've never known about them. And I think it's up to 4, maybe 5 people who I didn't know at all until, a month prior. I met them, said, hey, come on my podcast. One guy literally had not had a vocal conversation, just exchanged emails before he came on as a guest. It worked out fine. I don't think I'll do it again. That's a little bit of a risky venture.
Mm.
But yeah, it's just fun. And yeah, that's my favorite part. And I remember either very beginning, maybe haven't even done it yet, was talking to one of my guests, Jeff Turk, who's a recruiter. And he noted when I was talking about the podcast, he heard the excitement in my voice that I was really looking forward to doing it. And, he was 100% correct. I was looking forward to doing it and talking to people. And, I've said many times, if I had no listeners, I'd probably keep doing it. I might lie to the guests and saying there are listeners. Well, you want me to come on a podcast that there's nobody listening to it? What's the point? So, but no, it's been a lot of fun.
Bert, do you have any listeners?
I have. Well, my wife has listened to one podcast so far,
Nice.
so I've got one, but it's doing okay. It's not millions and millions. I've seen a nice uptick in the last month, but what has surprised me is how many are outside the U.S. It's been, I think, 20 to 25% are outside the U.S. And I do remember uh, sending an email update out to a few people and said, last month I had more listeners in Trinidad and Tobago than I had in Ohio. And
Yeah, I took that to heart, Bert.
uh, having Doug living in Ohio and other numerous friends still living in Ohio was a little bit perturbed at that particular, both amused and perturbed at the same time.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Bert called me out.
Exactly. Yeah. So this
What
might be the
what's
last
your
time
what
we ever talk to each other.
what's your the podcast has evolved from your original thoughts, which is not unusual, right?
Sure, sure.
What are you thinking about for the coming year? More of the same? Or are you going to take it in a new direction? Undecided?
I'm thinking more of the same. The first podcast was a little bit choppy. A couple of people said, yeah, I can tell you were reading off for your next question. And I think I've gotten much smoother at that. And actually, half the time I don't even ask my questions. The conversation just naturally flows for the most part. One guy commented, and I've been trying to work this in with some success, is he most appreciated the very poignant moments, engineers sharing, what was their highlight. I think in one case it was actually a low light that impressed upon him. I think that was the examples from the first podcast where, Joe, engineer, he was testing some device and at a hospital or a clinic or whatever, and just, came outside and saw, some parents whose child was there, I think for something else, but just, they're very concerned for their child. And it just kind of brought home to him why he was doing what he was doing. And I want to work on getting those moments to come out.
I have. I listened to your podcast. I think I've missed a few, but I know in my Spotify which ones I haven't yet hit, and
Yep.
I will catch up, time permitting. That's not. I won't catch up. It's as I have the opportunity. Believe me, as
Yep.
I enjoy them, and I have seen the evolution of the podcast, and frankly, I really enjoy. Early on, it was they were good. I've enjoyed every episode, but I do see this shift in how your interview and hosting skills are being honed,
Yep.
and I do see you possessing the ability to probe and to stay within a framework, but get people to be real, and I,
Yep.
I see you doing that, and it's
Yep.
it's wonderful to see.
Let me throw in one of the favorite things I like to hear is that, oh, that's a good question. That just, that makes it for me.
Absolutely.
Especially when it's sincere. Sometimes they're a little less sincere. But yeah, and I guess one thing in my memory, which kind of gave me the confidence to do this and the opinion that I might be good at it, was some work thing years ago. I was meeting one of the guys in one of the other offices, and we were having a conversation, and found out that he liked cooking. And so I said, "All right, what's your favorite spice that you like to use?" And I could tell by his reaction that he thought that was a clever, interesting question, and it really went to the heart of what he was. I like cooking. Oh, that's a cooking question. What is your favorite spice? What's the best thing you make? Well, anybody can ask what's the best thing you make. When did you start cooking? Anybody can ask that question. What's your favorite spice? That's a little bit deeper. I'm trying to ask people what's their favorite spice a little more often.
I think that's cool. I like that. That is that one question that I often seek in interacting with people is what's the one question that people are going
Right,
to leave being inspired by, and that's
right,
exactly it.
right.
Speaking of questions, you surprised me in our interview with a lightning round, something you hadn't done with maybe some other
I was,
guests.
yeah, I typically have the grab bag question. I figured we'll go in lightning round this time.
How about we do a little lightning round?
In the table turning theme or table turning topic,
Let's
whatever.
do
We're,
that,
we're
shall we,
turning
for a few
tables, so let's
minutes?
continue. Let's continue turning the tables.
I'm not necessarily watching the time, but I'm going to just run through my lightning round and see where we
Yeah.
end up. Question number one. Why dexterity engineering?
Oh, all right. I think it's descriptive of me. I guess it goes in very well with a full stack engineer, being able to do a lot of different things from start to finish. But what is very appropriate for me personally is the street I grew up on was Dexter Terrace. So I am dexterity. Maybe I should move back to Dexter Terrace sometime. But anyways, no, that's why I like it.
I have spent multiple nights
At
in
Dexter
the
Terrace.
Uschold
Yep.
abode at
Yep.
Dexter Terrace, so I remember it quite well. Thank you. Second question. As a spectator, hockey or football?
As a spectator, live or TV?
Answer it any way you like. It's a lightning round.
Hockey live, football TV.
All right. And for the benefit of all, your pro sports teams are?
Bills and Sabres.
Nice.
And baseball, I'm at a whim. Maybe the Tigers, Blue Jays, Red Sox. And
You're
by marriage, a Mets fan.
okay.
Because
You're
my
a
wife
free
is a
agent.
big Mets
Oh,
fan.
so
Yeah.
she's in the middle of it right now,
Oh, that's why surprisingly, she's not aware of how in the middle of it she is.
huh?
Oh, they're in the playoffs now?
That is on brand for Dee. We love her dearly. Next question. Have you ever been on a bicycle built for two?
Many, many, many times. And I'm wondering, there may be a follow-up question that I don't want to step on your toes.
I want you to elaborate.
All right. I've doubled being on a bicycle built for two. I've been on a bicycle built for four. I have 3 kids, so that's 5. So we had the bicycle built for 4, and we had a little tag-along bike riding down the road. And it takes a lot of effort to drive that thing. I'm not going to talk about the pedaling, just the keeping it straight and going down the road without going into cars and getting yourself killed.
So that was 5 in
It was a
one bike.
bicycle bike built for 4 with a tag-along
Yeah.
trailer.
So there were 5 of you, and you were the stoker, obviously.
Well, it's called the cap. The captain's in the front. Stokers are the ones behind.
Pardon me. You were the captain.
Yeah,
Pardon me. I got it
yeah.
backwards. Yes.
And that was actually my wife's. One of her first email addresses was Tandem Stoker
Really?
because we had a tandem that we rode lots and lots. And
Nice. I guess I remember that now. Next question, Bert. How have palindromes played a role in your life?
Ah,
I can think
the
of 2.
I'm trying to think of the second. I'm not sure the second one. The first one, which I'm almost certain you're thinking of, is my phone number. Our phone number in Cincinnati, but mine initially was a palindrome.
Yes,
And I'm not going
indeed.
to give what it is because that phone number is still used for telephone and other sorts of PIN numbers. So I'm not going to reveal what it is.
I can't remember the last time I
What's
dialed it, but you and
this?
I used to dial it from time to time just to see who had it. But we indeed had a palindrome for a phone number.
I think I Googled it once, and I think it once belonged to a black female dentist.
Interesting.
Um,
Interesting. Well, for those who would, and I'm going to guess almost all wouldn't know, that the city of Hamilton, Ohio, for a brief period, decided to rebrand itself with Hamilton, including an exclamation point at the end.
right, yeah. So a few years it was on Hamilton. It was Hamilton.
And that very palindrome was listed in that phone book. So always a little fun thing I remind my friends from Hamilton is we used to have a phone number in there. The second one would be my daughter, Anna.
Oh, of course. How could I forget? How
You,
could I forget?
you are her godfather,
Uh,
and quite a devoted one, I might add.
yep.
Always
And I'm
appreciated,
very happy to say that her wedding date was the same as my birthday.
which
So
is
happy to
not really a
share.
palindrome, but it's symmetrical or
Yep.
something like that. It's a feature, I guess. Bert, have you ever had your handiwork, the results of your handiwork, celebrated by a marching band?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This has been on the podcast. Yes, I finished off the roof of my house as the marching band was running up the street, and listened to a bonus episode number 21B if you want to hear the full story of that.
Nice. Again, as I promised from the beginning, we were going to wrap up some previously discussed topics into that, but the idea, and I exaggerate this a little bit, but as that last hammer that last nail was tacked into the roof along the street came the marching band in
That's
perfect
pretty darn.
union.
That is pretty darn close.
Next question, same house. Have
All
you
right.
ever been a wiffle ball city champion?
No, I have not.
Nor have I. How close have you come?
It depends who you ask. If you ask me, I think I was a semifinalist. If I ask you, then we were runner-ups.
We played in the championship.
I I don't remember. I thought we got one game short of the championship, but so
No,
be it.
yeah,
We'll
I
argue
will
about that for a
insist.
good.
I, I will
I'm not
insist.
arguing too much with you. I'm not as much disagreeing as not agreeing.
Since I know their name, they were the Bash Brothers.
Well, that I remember that. I remember the Bash
Oh,
Brothers,
okay.
but
So
yeah,
we finished. We lost to them in the finals. So
yeah.
you were a citywide runner-up. Circa, it was 1992. It was like a week before I got married.
Oh well, okay.
Yeah.
We
So
did two,
therefore,
just two. We did just two tournaments, right?
the second year, yeah, was the tournament of which we do not speak.
Yeah. We've talked about John Hemner. That's another
We
reason we
have
don't like. We like John Hemner, but there's some things we don't like John Hemner for.
final, final question in the lightning round. How many baseball stadiums have you visited?
Oh, geez, I don't know. Um, I think it's probably 20
How did you
or
get
more.
so many?
That was what we did. We went to baseball stadiums, both with each other on escapades together, and I went on my own. I think at least twice, just going to catching a few. Added a new one to my repertoire this summer. We saw a game in. I had seen a game in. Did I see a game in the Kingdom? I don't remember if I ever saw a game in the Kingdom, but I did see a new game in, was it Safeco Field, Safeco Park
Okay,
out in Seattle. Did catch a game there this summer. I believe I sent you a few photos.
you did. Uh, I'm in San Francisco visiting my daughter, my son-in-law, and their newborn daughter, and they live less than 10-minute walk from Oracle Park. They can see it from their balcony,
Nice.
and they've become, I'll say, devoted Giants fans, which you can't blame them. They're right there.
Yep.
But yes, the background on that question has to do with you and I leaving Procter and Gamble, I think on the same day, and then we took 2 weeks off and drove around in my Jeep to many
Yep.
cities up and down the East Coast watching baseball games. And friends, this was before GPS, this was before the internet. We would literally read the paper, find the schedule, and go to the game and buy tickets.
Yeah, I think we went to AAA. AAA used to, you had a triptych where you say, I want to go from Buffalo to Washington D.C., and they give you this little folded a map of different pages. Each page had 40, 50 miles of your trip and places to stop and whatnot. And so we went to get a triptych for our trip. And, it's like Cincinnati to Cleveland to Buffalo to Montreal. And, it was like zigzagging all over the place. The woman said, it would be much more efficient if you went from Buffalo to New York. And no, sorry, but There's no games there those days.
I will share a side memory lane on that. Bear with me, listeners. We had left our jobs, and when we were in Buffalo, your dad had a private pilot's license, and so
Yep.
he took us up in a plane. I was in the front with him, and you were in the back. And when we were in over Canadian airspace, we flew over the falls,
Yep.
Niagara Falls, and he let me pilot for a while. And then on the return, as he was landing, you said, "Dad, Doug did not uh, keep his health insurance. All he has is life insurance. So
That was
this
both of
has to
us.
be both of us. That's right, both of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
So this has to be an all or nothing landing, Dad."
That's right. Yeah, it was. Well, I think it wasn't a choice. It was, I think, health insurance went to the end of the month and life insurance went for 30 days.
That's right. That's
Is
right.
what I
So we
recall.
didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
We
As I
survived.
recall, as I recall, Dad was not particularly fond of that observation.
No,
He thought it was a little morbid.
I don't think in our youth we impressed your dad very much with that.
But
I
it was
felt his
kind of true.
disapproval.
Exactly.
Bert, let's wrap this up. What
Uh,
are some things you do outside of the dexterity engineering and the podcast? What do you do for
I
fun?
think the biggest thing for fun is going for bike rides out here in north central Massachusetts. And without a lot of effort, I could go ride for an hour or two without any stoplights. Pretty easy to do that. So I usually don't put that much effort into it. I usually get to one or two, but yeah, that's where I spend my time. A lot of thinking, just enjoying the weather, especially this time of year with the leaves changing colors. It's good stuff. The other thing, which I've mentioned, and I'll tie this back to cycling in a second, you'll be surprised how, is I'm studying to become a deacon in the church. 2.5 years into it, half a year through this semester, and very much enjoying it. But there candidly are occasions, especially when I've got a long paper to write, where it's like, ugh, I don't want to do this. When I start writing it, I, enjoying the research, enjoying putting all the ideas and thoughts together, that I actually enjoy it. And then after an hour or two, I'm tired. I have to take a break. Which, when I was cycling and actually racing years ago, there were a handful of times where it's like, well, I've got to ride for an hour or two today, and just like, ugh, it's cold, it's raining, I really don't want to. But once I got out there and did it, there were many times I didn't want to go for a bike ride, but I don't think I ever didn't enjoy it. Even the bike rides that got cut short because there was a rainstorm that nearly blew me off the road. Maybe weren't cut short, but were delayed
Hmm.
temporarily. Always enjoyed going on a bike ride.
So, how much time until uh, your studies are completed?
2027 would be
2027.
the
That'll be June,
hopeful.
May or June of 2027.
Probably May, and there's a possibility that we'll have a big party celebrating both my ordination and our 30th wedding anniversary, which will likely be just a day or two before, depending exactly what week of May they have the ordination, assuming it's still in May.
Pretty
And
sweet.
my youngest son will be graduating from high school like 2 weeks later, so
That's going to be a
maybe we'll have a
transition
maybe we'll
time.
have a triple header.
Nice. That sounds fantastic. Anything else as we wrap up? Final questions, comments, or observations?
Oh, now I know how bad people feel when I ask them that question because I wasn't preparing for it. No, this podcast has been a lot of fun. I guess the most surprising answer I've gotten when I asked that question, I've gotten it multiple times and slight variations, was I wasn't really expecting to enjoy this, but it was actually a lot of fun. I'm not quite sure exactly how to take that. Because I know Sherry, who's your wife Molly's roommate, college roommate, she was one who said that. And, I remember starting the interview with the joke that, I've been trying to get some females to be his guests and wasn't able to. And finally got Molly. So I said, "Is Molly putting you up to this? Are you just a pity interview?" And she said no. But given her response at the end, I think there may have been a tiny bit of pity. Or at least a curiosity. It's like, what have I got to lose? But no, I'm surprised that people are surprised at how much fun they have. I'm not sure what this says about me, but it's interesting.
Well, you and I now are in a unique club, and I have been interviewed, and both are enjoyable, but this side of the desk is more enjoyable.
Is it really?
For me, yes.
Yeah, that might be true. I think I might agree with that. Yeah. I remember the very first one, it was less enjoyable because it was the first one and I was too much thinking of what question to ask next, and I wasn't just having a natural conversation with somebody. And the other thing that's interesting is at least twice while recording the podcast, I was thinking, this isn't quite what I want or quite what I expect or quite what I hoped for. But then after I start editing it, I like it much more. I said, no, this is actually pretty good. And what I haven't done yet, and maybe I should, is actually just, months after having downloaded and recorded one or recorded and uploaded whatever, is to listen to one a bit removed from the editing and actual recording aspect of it. So haven't done that yet, but fair chance I'll do that in the not too distant future. But yeah, this is 1 year. Hopefully I'll keep doing it in another year or two. This is good fun.
With that, I'm going to call this episode a wrap. Friends, please visit Bert's website, dexterityeng.com. I have used Bert's services from time to time through the years.
Yep, once or twice.
And the product that he has delivered has been outstanding, and he has my full endorsement, and I encourage you to do so. Bert, thank you for doing this. Thank you for letting me sit on this side of the table. I'm Doug Tiger. I'm president and CEO of Integral Manufacturing, integralmfg.com. If you need any contract manufacturing, give us a call, drop us a note. But this is all about beers with engineers, dexterity engineering, and our good friend Bert Uschold. Thank you so much, Bert, for this opportunity. And here's to another outstanding year ahead of us.
Right. Like to say, like and subscribe. Tell your friends.
There we go.
Very good. A lot of fun, Doug. Thanks.
Thank you, Bert.
Today's table turning episode is now complete, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you to Doug Tiger for taking over the interviewing seat and doing a fine job. You wouldn't believe how much editing I had to do to arrange his words to make myself look good. Next time, I'll be back to asking the questions. Also, in wrapping up the first year, I am putting together a compilation episode of all the jokes so far, so you can see what you like best and be the hit of the next engineering party that you go to. Please like, subscribe, comment, and tell your friends about the Beers with Engineers podcast. Until next time, this is Bert saying goodbye.